Who's Eric? Eric Mungai. Wow. Eric, young man, grew up in Maringo, Eastlands, far over. Grew up hearing that all the time, and I'm still proud of it. My story begins with my grandfather. My mom was a teenage girl when, still young, just barely out of her teens when she gave birth to me. And that experience, that, traumatic, unfortunate and everything, was, when I look back in hindsight, was a huge blessing. Because of that, I was able then to be brought up by the most amazing man in this world, my granddad. Joseph Mungai Gitubia, he was life. He was loving, he was kind. I feel like my granddad corrected all his parental mistakes that he made with his own children with me. He was far much better. And that's where my story begins. He anchored me, he led me, he guided me, he loved me, he corrected me. He was the everything a young man, a young boy would ask for and desire to have in a father. I grew up in an area that was full of crime, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, a rough neighborhood. It was rough, it was bad. I grew up with friends with no parents, with no fathers, The few friends who had dads were accountable. Like, they were the outliers. The rest of us knew our moms, our uncles, our aunties. So I grew up, the experience was we were in a community. We grew up in one big, huge community. But in that community, there are also so many traps, so many dangerous things and influences. And my grandfather was very, very keen in ensuring that I didn't fall into that. This is what he did. When I look back, we didn't have much. He didn't have much. What he had was love. He had a lot of love. He was very deliberate with me. My granddad would go wherever, whether it's in the streets of Nairobi or he goes visits any friend, and he'd come back home with this torn newspapers and magazines and novels. I don't know if you guys remember this, if people remember this or experienced this, or it was only unique to me. But my granddad would come home with a novel that began on page 78 and it would end on page 215. So you had to figure out how the story began creatively in your own mind, and also finish the story for yourself when you reach the end. But he wanted to give me exposure, and he did that the best way he could. He did that with those books, with those novels, with those stories, and allowed me to dream and see a whole new world. And demanded almost and forced me to read aloud. So he'd bring a magazine or a piece of newspaper and he'd sit and ask me to read to him. He had this special seat where he used to sit by himself. And as I'm reading to him, he'd doze off. And there I stop, and you're hoping he dozes and snores. I just knew where the snore meant he's completely asleep, so that I could sneak out. Because if I stopped and, before sleep had kicked in nicely, he'd wake up and ask me, why are you stopping? So he also helped me to read and learn, and even how to speak. That was the story. That was my story with him. He really was an anchor for me. And that's where my story begins. And that's where my experience with young men begins. Because he not only mentored me, he was not only specific and deliberate with Eric. He picked a few of my friends, some of the boys I used to hang out with. And interestingly, of the three young men, of the three of us, we were the ones that sort of still sober. And it's sad to say this, because these were my friends, these were kids I played with, these are kids I grew up with. And then these were kids I buried. These are kids who died. These are kids who were shot. These were kids who got into drugs. These are adults who now, just wasted away. And it's painful, because when I see them, what I see is not adults who've wasted. I see kids I played with, guys who are no different from me. And my granddad made all the difference. If it wasn't for him, probably be one of those guys. So found myself around my peers, my friends, spending a lot of time. My granddad used to drag me for community services a lot. We'd visit different places. Our home was actually sort of almost like a community center. Anyone who had any problems, suffering, going through something, kicked out, they always had a warm bed in our home. Maybe not a warm meal because food was hard to come by, but there was something. We shared what was there. So, playing around with kids. I'm off to a boarding school in primary school. Then I come back in high school. And when I came back, it was like completely, I was shocked. What I left, those 3 years that I was away in boarding school, and what I found when I came back was completely different. And again, that was very deliberate of him, because even over the holidays, he didn't want me in the house. He wanted me hanging out with different people. He wanted me visiting my aunties. He wanted me spending time with my cousins. So there's a part where I sort of missed out on my peers, the kids I grew up with. So when I came back, now I'm in high school, I'm in a day school, it was crazy. I felt like what I left was completely different. And that is where my desire and passion for young men began, because I could see what was going on with my friends, and the time I spent in a community center close to home. And that community center was actually a rehab center for street kids. So he wanted me on weekends, on holidays. I spent a lot of time there. And as I spent more time with these kids, rehab boys, actually specifically boys, the more I realized that we were at a disadvantage completely, myself included. I began to notice that we didn't have a lot of programs or systems or structures to help us, to mentor us, and to give us a stepping stone, a step up, a platform to stand on. And that's where my passion began, because the more I spent time with these boys, the more I realized that they had a lot of time in their hands. They had deep passion and a fire deep inside them, but they didn't know where to guide that fire, that flame, that energy. So they're in this rehab center for a few months, and then because there is no system, there is no structure, they have no idea how to guide and develop themselves, they'd be back to the streets. And that's how I began. It began very much as a volunteer thing. I just wanted to plug in and give the little I had, or the little that I understood, to these boys. And I began with a book club. The same way my granddad began with me. I began with a process where we could read books and just spend time together and talk. And the more I did it, the more I realized that we didn't have any structures. There are no structures in society. There are no systems to develop boys. And it's not that there's any, and I know that people do this a lot. It's when we speak about the male gender and the boy child, there's usually, and I do that a lot myself, but we usually want to use that in comparison to the girl child. And the reason why we do that, though unfortunate, is because if you observe young men long enough, you begin to actually realize that they are clueless. A lot of energy, a lot of strength, a lot of fire inside them, but completely clueless, completely lost. And before long, the things that begin to, mold them and inspire them are negative influences in society. Boys learn through modeling. We see, we do, and then repeat. That's how we learn. That's who we are. That's how we are wired. So what models are the boys seeing? What are the things that are available to them? And that then led to us now then sitting down and beginning to create solutions. We saw a problem and said, so how are you going to solve this problem that is in society? To begin with, we realized that, boys still go through some rites of passage system somewhere, but with a completely lack of structure in it. It's get circumcised, then you're told you're a man, And circumcision, or whatever rites of passage process that young men go through in the continent of Africa and in Kenya, is just symbolic. It's completely symbolic. Circumcision is symbolic. It's just a symbol. It's like a certificate. But then, where is the lesson? You know, it's like being given a university diploma and degree diploma with completely never having gone through school. So, no structures, young men going through life, clueless, you know, no mentorship, nothing. And we realize the challenge with the young men in our society is that they are not forged. No one forges them, and men are made, you know, literally. The only product necessary to make a man is the male gender. You're born male, but then you become a man. And you become a man because men are made. So that's what happened. We realized that there was no process. And that then gave birth to, you know, Yazua Afrika. And Yazua is a Swahili word for forge. So it's Forge Africa. And we said, if we want to forge the continent, if we want to forge our leaders, then we need to begin with them when they're very, very young. We need to find them when they are still ready, they are still raw, and take them through this fire, this forge, this crucible, and begin to forge them and to mold them and to give them the right values. And that's how then we began with, you know, the very first program, which is the Rites of Passage program known as Forge, for boys who are from the ages of 13, 14, young men who are about to go through the Rites of Passage stage. And like it says, it's forging. We forge them. You know, we take them through, and it's very experiential. We take them through a fire of sorts, you know, experiential fire, outdoors. Programs are very outdoors. We are very active, heavy programs. And the idea is to have the young men begin to challenge themselves and challenge their abilities and challenge their assumptions, but also give them a foundational understanding of what it means to be a man that is true. The things that define men have been the same for the last 30, 40,000 years. The things that defined the Stone Age man, some of those roles that he played are still the same things that define us today. You know, a man was the one who went out to hunt, who brought home food, and he was a protector. You ask men today, he'll tell you the exact same thing. You know, and it's amazing, but we are quite different, and we need to be able to realize that, especially today, that definition around roles is completely shifting and changing. We have women who bring home the entire pig. You're only bringing a few pounds of bacon. She went and bought the pig and is able to place it on the table. She's earning better than you. We have women who are better protectors, you know. So how about we stop defining us and defining our sons and telling our sons that the things that define a man are the roles he plays, and shift that to values. What are the values that, you know, then define you? And then that's how come then we go back, we go to the next stage from Forge. After we've laid the foundation, then we come to the things that define that man, and that's their Decide program. And in Yazua, we are very deliberate and very specific in how we want to do it. And we say that young men, the life of a young man is about decisions. What decisions is he making? And those decisions are based on the values. Yeah, they bounce off the foundational aspects of the values that he has. Then he makes decisions. Listen, a young man will only make decisions dependent on the information he has at hand. Yeah, we have young men who made decisions to become alcoholics, not because they are bad. It was what was available. They made decisions depending on the values that they saw and, you know, model themselves after. So what model have you placed in front of your boy or your son? And that's how then we come to the program known as I Decide. It's 13 to 17 years of age for young men. And I Decide is exactly that. It's very foundational, it's elemental. It's the I is identity. You know, define yourself. What's your identity? Where do you come from? And we ask the boys to go back to their history. We ask them, find out what's your past, what's your history, so that then you're able to then define your now, and also be able to define your future and how it's going to be. And we do that with the help of different mentors. We find models. That's the way boys learn. Young men, we are interesting. Men are interesting. Even when we are macho and we are full of ego, our ego is mirrored against someone else's ego. I see someone, I admire how they behave, how they walk, how they talk. I begin to do it, and it becomes me. So how about starting to place some good models in front of your son? And that's what we do through the I Decide program. We have them experience and interact with different models, male models, positive models, who come in and take them through the different lessons, the 7 lessons. It's identity, discipline, excellence, character and creativity, insight and integrity, then drive and determination, which is very, very important to young man, and empathy. How do you connect to your community? Because we want you to connect to your community. We want you to come back. We want young men who see their role. If they're going to use a role to define themselves, the only role that they need to use is the role of service. I'm a servant, I'm serving my community, I'm taking my community forward, I'm developing my community. And from there, after that program, then we plug into something we call build. And build is exactly that. It's Jenga. Are you building? What are you building for your society? What are the challenges that we see in community? Going back again to my own story, in that rehab center, I saw a problem, and I started to Jenga, I started to build a solution. So what solutions are you building for your community? What solutions is your boy building for your community? And are you allowing him the space and the capacity to try and fail? And for us to stop placing a standard on our sons that, you have to be perfect, you have to succeed at all cost. No, he doesn't. He doesn't have to succeed at all cost. He just has to be happy and healthy and connected to his community. So what is he building for his society? Where has he plugged in? And what are the solutions he's providing? And it doesn't have to be a crazy, amazing solution. It just has to be something small. It just has to be collecting trash. It just has to be placing some trash bins around his community and telling people to throw trash responsibly. It doesn't have to be something out of this world, So from build, then we came to now this place where we realized, this young man is 21 years of age. He has gone through all these different experiences and structures and systems. Now, is there a place where men can just be? A space where we can talk, be real, be inspired, engage with more models, positive models and more mentors. A place where we bring good men in. Some good men in our society who can come and help us then begin to see what do we need to do in society, where are the places that we need to plug in. And that's how then we began the program known as the Fire Pit. The Fire Pit is for young men between the ages of 18 to 21. And it's a place where we come to be just inspired. I want to hear your story. I want to know you. And then after I've heard your story, tell me about what I need to do. What's the future? It's a place for old men. It's us going back to our roots as Africans and having an old man, an elder, come to sit down and tell us, this is where we are from. This is our story. This is how we thread through time. And this is where we need to go. It's a place for us to reconnect, to become one. For that masculine energy, positive masculine energy, to find a healthy place to be stoked and to grow, to become a fire that then brings change and effect in our community and in our society. So that's who we are as Yazua Afrika. That's what we do. Those are the problems that we are solving. So far, what we've done, our programs are very, it's been through word of mouth. It's friends talking about them. It's people who've gone through our programs. But to sign on for any of our programs, they're available on our website, yazuaafrika.com. And you're invited. Come, see what we do, read our blogs, experience us, go to our YouTube page, subscribe, learn about us, get to see and experience the Fire Pit sessions that we usually have, or the different sessions with the young men who've gone through our programs. That's how you join in, that's how you plug in. That's how you come in, and whether you're a mentor or a parent to a son who feels that your son needs some guidance and some mentorship, just plug in. If you're a mentor, if you're a male who is excited about helping young men, plug in. We can't do this alone. It's huge, it's big. We have a tagline, an internal tagline as an organization. We usually say, in our lifetime. And what that means, every time there's a big problem that is presented, teenage pregnancies, And half of those teenage pregnancies are among teenagers themselves, and it's young men who are teenagers. And when such a problem comes up, we usually say, we will solve it within our lifetime. And we are looking for men, and we want men who are able to plug in and say, within my lifetime, I'm going to give boys a stepping stone, a chance to be good men in society. If the man is protected, if the boy is okay, and sober and strong in his own identity, then the girl is protected. You know, we need to shift our boys from being victims and perpetrators to becoming change agents and leaders. That's what we need to do for our young men. We need to change the story. Their story needs to change. We need to change what we've told them or what they think about themselves, and they need to start seeing themselves as leaders and change agents in their communities and in their societies. So we invite you to come and engage with our programs. Go to our website. We've made a lot of our products available, specifically the I Decide Journal, in an attempt to reach as many young men as possible. There are young men in Wajir, there are young men in Mandera, there are young men in Kisumu, there are young men in Mombasa, there are young men in Muranga that we'll never be able to engage with in a one-on-one sort of engagement. But as a mentor and as a man and as a community, wherever you are, plug in.